Got a problem? You need a hack. Hacks are common solutions to tricky problems. Don't have a sippy cup? Try some saran wrap and a straw. Broke your flip-flop? Try a bread clip. Need to keep your Christmas wrapping paper organized? Try a toilet paper roll. Need to make your relationship better? Try relationship hacks.
Well, good morning to everybody joining us online and our friends up in Churchill, Manitoba, those of you at the fire hall, and of course everybody here at the factory. It's so good to be together. You know, I love words, and one of the reasons I love words is because they change. The meaning actually changes of words. Take the word hack, for instance. It's a word that comes from about the 12th century. It meant to take a machete or a big knife and to slice randomly and to hack at something. But about 30 years ago, if I would have heard the word hack, I would have thought that it was probably something of an annoying, spasmodic cough in a throat. You have a hack, right? Or maybe it was that handyman that came over to our house and was really a bad handyman. He was such a hack and did a bad job. And yet today, if you hear the word hack, it probably has something to do with somebody gaining unauthorized access to your digital account or your computer. Or possibly, positively, a creatively improvised solution to a problem, a clever tip or technique for improving something. Now, you probably have a bunch of hacks. I have a bunch of hacks at my house that I love to use. One of them is a tennis ball hanging from a string in our garage. I don't know how many of you use this, but it's a perfect way to get your car parked in exactly the same spot every time so the garage door will close. For me, you know that I'm cheap, so I do not like buying shop vac bags, and so when mine's full, I cut the end off, and I empty it, and I duct tape it back together. I get 5, 6, 7 uses out of a shop vac bag. But one of my favorite hacks is a smoker that I have. A number of years ago, I decided I wanted to have a smoker for smoking meats, but I didn't want to spend $500, $600, $700 on a smoker. So when my pressure tank in my well water system went, instead of throwing it out, I decided to turn it into a smoker. So I modified it, and I now have this amazing smoker that smokes the most succulent and tender meats. It's just wonderful, and that's one of my favorite hacks. So we're talking about relationship hacks, and we've been doing that for a couple of weeks. Today, I'm so excited about rolling out a super practical relationship hack. But before I do, we've invited Ingrid to come and to share what a real-life hack looks like in her life that kind of works in everyday life. And so, Ingrid, why don't you share that with us?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be here with you guys this morning. For those of you who don't know, my name is Ingrid, and I usually like to introduce myself as the one who's married to the guy who stands on the stage with the guitar, who dresses like a ninja, has a beard, and a hat. Ben and I have been married for over 22 years. Yes. Yeah. And we're blessed with 5 really uniquely amazing children, and most days I really, really like them. Asher is 19, Cole is 17, Creston is 16, Ellie will be 15 next month, and our little Guatemalan songbird, Tatiana, is 7. So I was asked to participate in this month's series called Relationship Hacks, and in a moment of weakness, I said yes. So I don't consider myself an expert on relationships at all, so I'm just going to take a few minutes to be really real with y'all this morning. 22 years of marriage, 19 years of parenting. That's a chunk of time, and it's a lot of relationshiping. Did you know that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line? That's really cute and simple, but it's not real life. You take 2 people, you bring them together in relationship like marriage, with their personalities, their wills, that whole nature versus nurture thing, and you set them at point A and you send them off to get to point B, and in the end, it's probably going to look like a drawing from a 2-year-old. No disrespect. Then you add kids to the mix, and suddenly you're dealing with 3D and you're in an alternate dimension. It gets complicated. And you know what? That's just our immediate family. But I can't help but marvel at how far we've come. When our kids were really little, I made the decision to homeschool. Ben supported me in that decision. And I have to tell you, there's been a lot of times when I've regretted that decision. There were so many personality clashes and conflicts, those developmental stages, the need to assert their individuality and independence. There were a lot of days when there wasn't any schooling happening, just a lot of disciplining, and it was exhausting. And I was sharing my struggles with a group of my homeschool mom friends, and I was saying, I think it might be time for me to send my kids to school. I think it might be best for our relationships to do that. And one of my friends challenged me, and she said, well, isn't that why we're homeschooling? So that we can work through these challenging seasons, these struggles, in the safety, security of our loving homes. It changed my thinking. We're on this crazy ride, and it is a wild adventure, an amazing journey. But sometimes it gets downright ugly. I really don't always like the person that I was or am. I've made a lot of mistakes. My family has seen the worst of me. I've had to apologize about 1 billion times. But thank goodness for the grace of God on my life and over my family. The definition of grace is the unmerited and unearned love and favor of God. God's grace is limitless. No matter how big my screw up, his grace is always bigger. Like an ocean without boundaries, we come with our little vessels and dip into it. He welcomes us in our brokenness with our limited measure of grace and invites us to his infinite source. In his goodness and mercy, he does not leave us stranded or static. But as we seek him and seek relationship with him, he moves us forward, giving us more, increasing our measure from grace to grace and from glory to glory. He is continually ready to pour out his grace in our relationships and in our lives. Isn't that amazing? When I was a little girl, my mom would often wash my bedding on Saturdays because she worked. And she wouldn't get back to making my bed until the end of the day. And so she'd put the fitted sheet on and the pillowcase, and then I would lie down and I would wait. And she would take the flat sheet and she would fluff it out into the air. And I would lie there and wait for it to float down and cover me. And then she'd take the wool duvet and do the same thing. And then the quilt that my grandma had made me. And I would just lie there loving the feeling of those layers of blankets covering me. The weight and warmth and coziness, often straight from the dryer. To me, this is a beautiful picture of what grace is. Like a beautiful covering, hiding our guilt and shame and brokenness. God is not interested in exposing us in our sin, but rather he covers us and actually wipes away all record. He washes it all away. He's not interested in shaming us. He's interested in moving us forward into our fullest potential. And as we walk in relationships with those we love, we have an opportunity to take God's example and do the same for them. Love covers a multitude of sin. 1 Corinthians 13 is a chapter on love. And verse 4 says, love suffers long and is kind. And it goes on to describe the very nature of God and what we are trying to become. And it ends by saying, love endures all things. Love never fails or ends, depending on the translation. When we pass from this life into eternity, we don't take anything with us. Nothing in this world is eternal except our relationships. Isn't that worth fighting for? 7 of us living under one roof in a moderately sized rectangular box, there are bound to be some interesting things happening. It gets messy, sometimes really loud and heated. Sticking with people is not easy, even the ones that we love the most. But the hardest things in life are usually the ones that come with the greatest reward. The people that we love are worth fighting for. These relationships are training us and teaching us about our Father and preparing us for a life of discipleship. Confession, I'm not much of a hack person. I don't think I've ever done anything easy in my entire life. Just ask Ben. But here it is. When someone wrongs you, when someone that you're in relationship with, someone that you love is struggling, and you have a choice to make about how you are going to respond to them, try covering them with a blanket of grace. Thanks.
That's brilliant. That is brilliant. Hacks are all about taking everyday common items that are laying around the house and using them in ingenious ways. So the question is, in your relationship, are you covering the people in your life with the blanket of grace, or are you leaving them out in the cold? I don't think you'll look at a blanket in the same way again. I love it. So today we're going to take a look at a few more hacks. I don't think it's an over-exaggeration to say that the hacks we're going to look at today, or the hack we're going to look at, is a game changer. I'm actually a little bit giddy about teaching this one out because I believe in it so much. I think it's going to transform some of our relationships, and I've been on the receiving end of this hack this past week, and so I have experience with it. Now, in order to learn about this hack, we're going to dig into the Bible, Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 to 17. Now, Ephesians chapter 5 and 6 are two of the most relationally charged chapters in the Bible. They talk about how to relate to other people with words, how to relate to other people with actions, how to relate to people who are outside the faith, how parents are to relate to their children, children to their parents, how husbands are to relate to their wives, how wives are to relate to their husbands, how back in Ephesus 2,000 years ago, how slaves are to relate to their masters and how masters are to treat their slaves. And yet the whole passage hinges on these two verses or three verses, Ephesians 5, 15 to 17. Let's read them. Look carefully then how you walk. Look carefully how you walk, how you live. Not as unwise, but as wise. Make the best use of your time. Make every minute count. Don't live thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. If I was to boil this verse and this hack down to one single word, it would be this: intentionality. Intentionality. Now, to fully understand the meaning and the impact and the importance of this word intentionality, we need to drop in on a couple of university labs, and we need to go on a little tour, and we need to learn about two other words, entropy and atrophy. Entropy and atrophy. Now, these words are easily mixed up. They kind of sound the same. I'll probably mix them up this morning because they're easily mixed up, and yet we need to learn about these words. And so we're going to walk into the physics lab to learn about entropy. As we're in the physics lab, we're going to learn about the second law of thermodynamics. Now, stick with me. Don't let me lose you here. The second law of thermodynamics says this: heat always moves from hotter objects to colder objects or downhill, unless new energy in some form is supplied to reverse the direction of the heat flow. I realize that's a lot for a Sunday morning. But listen, you know about entropy every day. You see it and you experience it. When you pour that hot coffee or that hot tea into your mug, you begin to experience entropy. The heat from the hot coffee or tea begins to go to the cold milk that you poured in. It begins to move towards the cold mug that you poured it into. It begins to move towards the coaster or the table that your mug is setting on, and even the air around it. The heat begins to move out, and if you leave it long enough, it's going to become a lukewarm, rather not pleasant drink. This is entropy. Entropy is where the heat and the molecules get disorganized and they disperse and they move from hot to cold. That's entropy. Now, in order to understand atrophy, we need to go into the biology lab. And here's the definition of atrophy. Atrophy is a loss of mass or strength of muscles and bones due to prolonged immobility. This type of atrophy can usually be reversed with the introduction of exercise of the muscles. Now, how many of you have broken a bone and you've been in a cast? Where are all the broken bone people? Okay, a whole bunch of you. So you know about this. When I was 12 years old, I broke my right arm, and it was a particularly nasty break, and so it needed to be in a cast for longer than normal. And when the doctor finally took the cast off, I barely recognized my arm. It was half the size of my other arm. And it was skinny and scrawny and white and pale and flaky skin on it. It was gross. But this is atrophy. This is when muscles are not being used. They wither and they weaken and they waste away, and the muscles in the bone waste away because of the lack of use. So why am I taking you on a tour of the physics lab and the biology lab to learn about entropy and atrophy when we're talking about relationships? Well, simply because of this. Some of us are in relationships right now that are in some stage of entropy. Some of us are in relationships right now that are experiencing atrophy. We're in relationships right now. You have a relationship in your life that used to be red hot with heat, but it has cooled over time. You have a relationship in your life that used to be strong and vibrant and robust and energized, but it has lost muscle mass. And it has lost strength, and it has become weak and dormant. But here's what I want you to notice. That in the second law of thermodynamics and the law of atrophy, there is a solution built right into the laws. Did you notice that? Here it is. When it comes to entropy, it will go downhill. The heat will disperse unless new energy in some form is supplied to reverse the direction of the heat flow. In atrophy, this type of atrophy can usually be reversed with the introduction of exercise of muscles. Welcome to the wonderful world of intentionality. This is where intentionality begins to kick in. Intentionality has the power to reverse entropy. Intentionality has the power to reverse atrophy. Intentionality is that new energy and that new exercise that will reverse the downhill, downward, natural gravitational pull that cools and weakens relationships. Or to put it another way, relationships will naturally cool and move towards chaos and weaken and deteriorate without new and fresh energy and exercise. Now, I don't say this in a prideful way at all, but Carolyn and I have a strong, intimate, on-fire, robust relationship. We've known each other for 38 years. We've been married for 36 of those years. And yet, here's the point, and yet the forces of entropy and atrophy wear on us as much as they wear on any other couple or any other family or any other relationship. You know, some married people are surprised. They're even shocked when they are married 6 years, 11 years, 19 years, 23 years, 33 years, and the relationship begins to feel cold and weak and anemic and loveless and unromantic. Some parents are surprised and even shocked when their kids turn 12 and 18 and 27 or 32 or 45, and the relationship begins to drift. And there's less trust in the relationship, and it's more obligatory, and there's less life-giving elements to the relationship. Some friends are shocked and even surprised when they've been friends for 6, 12, 18, 32 years, and the relationship begins to become distant, and it lacks energy and fresh fun and new experiences. But here's the deal. You should not be shocked. You should not be surprised. In fact, you should expect it. If you're in a relationship, you should be ready for it, because entropy and atrophy are what happens to every relationship. Unless you intervene and work to reverse the effects of entropy and atrophy on the relationship. So the Apostle Paul says this: look carefully then how you walk. Look carefully how you are living your life, not as unwise, but as wise. Make the best use of your time. Make every minute count. Don't live thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. Listen, your relationship will never get better. It will never get closer. It will never get hotter. It will never get stronger. It will never get more energized. It will never get more vibrant or healthier on its own or by accident. It cannot drift into health and strength. The laws of entropy and atrophy teach us that everything left on its own will become cold and chaotic and will decline and decrease and disintegrate. To put it another way, if you are not injecting new and fresh energy and effort and initiatives into your relationship, please do not expect it to naturally improve, because it won't. The laws say it will go the other direction. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to step back into the lab, and we're going to dissect Paul's words. So let's begin with verse 15. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise. Do you ever go to a restaurant and look around and you see a couple, obviously on a date, maybe married, romantic in some way, but there's a couple there, and they're just sort of sitting there, not talking? Do you ever see those people? Maybe they're even on their phones, but they just aren't really engaging with one another. Well, if you'd gone to the old spaghetti factory this last Monday, which was the day before Valentine's Day, you would have seen a couple that looked like that. Carolyn and I'm too cheap to go out on Valentine's Day. After 37 Valentine's dates, I can't be bothered with the crowds and the expense. So I asked Carolyn, would you like to go out on the 13th instead of the 14th? And she said, sure. So we went to the old spaghetti factory. Hadn't been there forever. And we place our order, and then we are just sitting there. And I'm looking around at some other couples and people around, and I don't know if Carolyn felt it, but I felt awkward. I felt like I had invited her on this romantic day before Valentine's Day date, and we weren't talking. We were straining to make small talk. And it felt awkward, and it felt like this was not a great date. And we were just sort of looking around, and you know, after 37 Valentine's dates, you know, you're okay with silence, but you've also kind of talked about everything on the planet there is to talk about. So I was feeling awkward. And I wasn't sure how this date was going to go until Carolyn injected our conversation with 9 simple words that cranked up the Bunsen burner heat of our conversation. And these are the 9 words she injected into our conversation. She asked me a question. Very simple. She said this: so how would you rate our marriage right now? Wow. I knew I had 2 choices. I could either kind of give her that conversation-ending, shallow answer, fine, good, okay, or I could actually think about it and engage. And so I decided to think about it and engage. I said, you know, I think we're solid. I think we're healthy. I think we have a good marriage. But after 36 years, there's a gravitational pull towards boredom. There's a gravitational pull towards the mundane and the routine. I said, you know, it feels like many of our best adventures are behind us. It feels like some of our greatest mountains that we've climbed are behind us. And to be honest with you, it's just not quite as fun as it used to be. Well, I got to tell you, that sparked the next 90 minutes of energized, spirited, exciting, crank up the heat discussion about marriage and about the adventures that lie ahead of us and what mountains are left to climb and what we're going to do about this. We talked about the unique dynamics of having 3 adult children who are all now married, and we decided to wrestle with this question. How does a couple married 36 years turn up the heat? And how could we reignite our very good marriage once again and take it to yet the next level? And all of that was sparked, all that fire and heat and energy was sparked by 9 simple, well-placed words. Paul says, look carefully then how you walk. Analyze how you're living. Look carefully. Pay attention to how you live. Study what your next step is. Plan where you're going. Be aware of the direction and the relationship where you are. Don't just walk and live haphazardly. Don't just walk aimlessly. Don't just go wherever you kind of feel like going unintentionally, but rather take time to assess where you are and plan where you want your relationship to go. Now, I love practicality. The theory is okay, but if theory does not connect it to practicality, I lose interest very quickly. So I want to get really, really practical. And I want to give you 8 questions that you can use in a relationship. Now, these are not intended for just romantic relationships. These could be relationships with your kids or friends or relatives or whatever. You can modify these questions, but these are 8 assessing the relationship questions that you can pull out, and they will add hours of interesting conversation to your relationship. The first one, number 1, Carolyn asked me, how would you rate our relationship right now? Number 2, what could I do to make you feel more loved and respected? Woo, there's a good question. Sit with that person. What could I do to make you feel more loved and more respected? Number 3, what do you wish I would say to you more often? Wow, that's a great question. Number 4, what is one of your dreams that you would like me to support? This is a question that we went on to ask at the old spaghetti factory. And I learned of some of Carolyn's dreams. 36 years in, I'm learning of some dreams. And she's learning of some of my dreams. And we're deciding, can we support one another in these dreams? Number 5, what is something you wish I would stop doing? Woo, there's a good one. That'll create some fire. Do you have the guts to ask that question? What is something I do that annoys you that you wish I would stop doing? Number 6, what is something you want or need from me? Number 7, what is something that you feel would improve our relationship? Let's talk about it. What do you think would improve this relationship? And number 8, if you had 3 wishes for our future, what would they be? Now, you're probably not going to remember these questions, so if you go to the Riverwood app or the Riverwood website, you're going to find a tab on there called Actionables. And under Actionables, you're going to find something called Practical Relationship Helps, and these questions are there. So if you are married, if you're in a dating relationship and your conversation is getting a little slow, a little awkward at a restaurant, take out the Riverwood app and begin to ask these questions. You'll be there for the next 4 hours. It'll be amazing. Things are going to heat up. It's awesome. Because Paul says, number 1, apply intentionality of direction. Apply intentionality of direction. Look carefully how you're walking, how you're living, not as unwise, but as wise. But Paul goes on in verse 16 to say this, make the best use of your time. Make every minute count. Entropy and atrophy are very, very different, and yet they have this in common. They both use time to cool and weaken something. They do their most destructive work over time. So if you want to battle entropy and atrophy in a relationship, you're going to need to enter into the arena of time, and you're going to need to fight in that arena. Let me put it this way. Relationships cool and become weak and die slowly over time. So if you want to heat up a relationship, to strengthen a relationship, to inject life into a relationship, you are going to need to become extremely intentional about your time. Time is interesting. We waste it so easily, don't we? I mean, we can go through a day or a week of days or a month and really just have wasted time. We go through the same boring routines every single day, and then we watch 3 hours of Netflix, and then we scroll TikTok and Instagram and Facebook for another hour, and that day runs into the next day, and yet the reason Paul says make the best use of your time, make every minute count, is because there is nothing more valuable in your life than time. Let me put it this way. Time, marked by the beating of your heart and the inhaling and exhaling of your lungs, is the single most precious, non-renewable commodity you have. In other words, it's life itself. Time is life itself. You cannot take it back. Once you spend a minute, it is gone. There is no redeeming that minute. Once you spend that minute, it is gone forever. You can't get it back. Yet in relationships, we often operate with this myth that says, I'm going to give somebody quality time. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to make the moment really special for them, and I'm going to give them some quality time, but not necessarily quantity time. I want to suggest to you, and you may not agree with this, but I want to suggest that that is a lie, that that's a myth, that the two, quality and quantity time, are not different and opposite. The reality is that the only kind of time, there's only one kind of time, and that is quantity time that will turn into quality time. As a young dad, it was very easy for me to say, wow, I'm so busy. I got so many demands on my life. I got so many deadlines. I got so many things coming against me, so many things calling for my time. I don't have a lot of time for my kids right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to eke out an hour of quality time, and I'm going to give them some quality time. And in that, I hope to create a special hour that they're going to remember for a long time. Well, here's where the myth breaks down. You can't engineer meaningful connection and moments when the timer is counting down. If you have the stopwatch going, you cannot create meaningful connection and moments with that stopwatch timing down. And that's because the best experiences that happen in relationships, tenderness, revelation, surprise, humor, vulnerability, enjoyment, trust, romance, wonder, intimacy, openness, risk, delight, bonding, familiarity, understanding, ease, laughter, friendship, hope, forgiveness, optimism, courage, confidence, and security. None of that happens when the stopwatch is counting down on a designated quality time. Those experiences, the best experiences of relationship, only happen with quantity time. Quite simply, the only thing that creates quality time is quantity time. Or you can't have quality time without quantity time. So the more time you give somebody, the better the relationship is going to be. And yet, how many of us are failing to invest time into a relationship, and yet we're expecting it to get better? We're expecting it to improve. Okay, that's all the theory stuff. So let's break it down to practicality. What does this look like in practical terms? Well, I'm going to give you one simple word. I'm going to whittle the whole thing down to one word. Time equals pursuit. With every heartbeat, with every inhaling and exhaling of your lungs, you are pursuing something. Maybe you're pursuing peace. Maybe it's relaxation. Maybe it's downtime. Maybe it's a work goal. Maybe you're pursuing money or wages or entertainment, or maybe you're pursuing romance or hobby or fun or distraction or happiness, or maybe you're pursuing relief or help or education or a career or an experience. But if you want to reverse the effects of entropy and atrophy in a relationship, you need to begin to pursue that person. You need to pursue them. You need to go after them. Husbands, are you pursuing your wives? Wives, are you actively pursuing your husband? Now, I know what's spinning in your head right now. It's just as plain as the nose on your face. It's, I've been married 17 years. You want me to pursue my spouse? I've been married 25 years. You want me to pursue my spouse? I've been married 30 years. What do you mean, pursue my spouse? Listen, Carolyn and I are married 36 years. And we continue to pursue and chase and hunt and hound one another like we were a dating couple. Here's how bad it is. When Carolyn goes out and she's got a number of evening meetings, I know where she is at every moment because I look on my phone. I've got her tracked. And the reason I'm tracking her is because I want to know when she's coming home. So I'll check my phone 10 times, and then I begin to see the little blue dot moving. And then I begin getting ready. I stage the house. I make sure that it's all clean. I watch her as she drives in. I watch her lights come into the driveway. As her lights come into the driveway, I set my computer down. I make sure there's no crumbs on the counter. I make sure all the dishes are done. The candle is lit. The house is staged. And I go to the door, and I position myself at the window so she can't see me, but I can see her. So that when she's walking in the door, I open the door just as she's beginning to reach for the door. I open that door for her. And I take her coat off of her, and I hang her coat up, and I give her a hug. I am pursuing her. I want to know when she's home. I want to pursue her 36 years in. And I'm pursuing her like a lovesick puppy. And I love it. And when she goes out shopping with her girlfriends to these crafty sales, you know what happens? You know what she's doing? She's not just enjoying her friends and going out to these crafty sales. She's looking for something for me. And then when she comes home, she pursues me, and she looks for me, and she comes hunting after me, and she gives me this thing, and she's giving me some great stuff. Jalapeno honey. Have you ever tasted a jalapeno honey? It is hot. It is burn your face off honey. I love it. It's so great. Working man's hand cream of some sort that she found at some craft sale, or some uniquely flavored hummus or meats or sausage, and she's pursuing me, and I know the whole time she's out with her girlfriends, she's looking and hunting for something that she can give me with me in mind. But this principle is not just for people in romantic relationships. Parents give their kids time as they pursue them. Guy buddies, you give your friend time as you pursue them, and you plan to go hunting together or work on a project together or go to the game or bowling or a movie or out for coffee. Friends reverse the cooling effects of entropy and the draining effects of atrophy by pursuing one another and bringing into the relationship the most precious and valuable gift that you can, the gift of your time. Paul calls people in relationship to, number one, the intentionality of direction. Own and take responsibility for where the relationship is today. Don't blame somebody else. Own it yourself. Take responsibility and boldly assess. Sit down and boldly assess where are we at. Let's have this conversation. Number two, the intentionality of time. Make the best of your time. Make every minute count. And number three, the intentionality of words. Paul says this. He says, don't live thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. You know, I can't think of anything more thoughtless, any exercise that we engage in more than talking. We talk thoughtlessly. You know, studies show that the average male, on average, speaks about 7,000 words a day. The same study shows that, on average, women speak about 20,000 words a day. That means in any given week, as a guy, I'm speaking just under 50,000 words. And you females are traditionally, typically, on average, speaking about 140,000 words. That's a lot of words. But here's the question. How many of those words are intentional? And how many of those words are haphazard and thoughtless and a little bit careless? You know, a couple of months ago, my latest son-in-law, to join my collection of son-in-laws, I have some wonderful son-in-laws. The latest one is Scott, Brittany's husband. He began playing squash. And I got all excited because I haven't played squash in 12 to 15 years. So I went down to the basement. I dug out my old dusty squash racket, and I asked him if I could begin playing squash with him. And so we began playing squash. We've played about 100 games now together in the last couple of months, and I'm having so much fun getting back in there. But if I was to describe what my squash experience has been up until this last week, it would be this: reactionary. I was playing very, very reactionary. With great amounts of huffing and puffing and wheezing and sweating and flailing, I was chasing that ball wherever Scott would hit it, and I would have to go running after it. It was a great display of thoughtlessness and inattentiveness. However, this past week, something happened. This past week, something clicked in my brain, and I realized that I didn't have to be reactionary, but I could be intentional in playing squash. So here's what I did. I began to grab the center of the court in the front, and I decided to begin to aim where I was going to hit that ball. I have never had more fun in my life. It was so great. I aimed the ball to the left, and I would hear Scott running over to the left side behind me. Then I thought, well, I'm going to make him run to the other side. So I'd aim the ball to the right, and then he'd have to run all the way across the court to the right. I had him going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until he was wheezing, and he was the one who was huffing and puffing. And no longer was I running around like a crazed and frantic chicken with sweatbands, but instead I was actually intentionally planning where I was going to have that ball go. And it felt so good. I took control of the play. I was no longer reactionary. I was intentional. Well, when it comes to the 7,000 or 20,000 words that each of us speak every day, so many of those words are reactionary and haphazard and thoughtless. And I want to challenge you to begin to make them intentional. I would say that I'm 58 years old, and I'm just learning this now. So if you're younger than me, please learn this before I'm learning it. Begin to target where you want those words to go and what impact you want those words to have. On the Riverwood app, again, under actionables, under these intentional words, you're going to find some sentence starters. Let me just sort of give you a quick taste of these. A phrase like this: I was watching the way you did blank. I was watching you when you did blank. I was watching the way that you prepared supper for the family. I was watching the way that you did homework with the kids tonight, and then you took such care to tuck them in. With this latest snow, I was watching the way you got all bundled up and you went outside and you shoveled the walk for us. And I just want you to know, blank, because my thoughts were blank. Wow, you take such remarkable care of our family. You really put your heart into it, and I just want to say thank you. Now let me ask you a question. If you were to be on the receiving end of those words, would it make a difference in your life? Would it make a difference in the relationship? You bet it would. It's a game changer. Intentionally aimed words. Imagine saying this to someone in your life. Do you know what most people don't know about you, but I do? You're blank. You're quiet. But you have a tremendous amount of wisdom. You're one of the most loyal and protective people I know. Whenever I'm with you, I feel so incredibly safe. You are so organized. You pay attention to details that I never see. If this household was left up to me, it would be just a mess. But because you are so organized and so detail-oriented, we're not a mess. We're running so smoothly. Thank you. You felt it, didn't you? You felt what laser-focused words and intentional words do. And there's plenty more sentence starters on the actionable page. Our time's up. But not before I leave you with a riddle. There are 3 frogs sitting on a log. One of them decides to jump off. How many frogs are left on the log? 3. Right answer. 3. Just because you decide and just because you have intentions in your heart does not mean that anything is going to happen. That frog decided to jump off, but never actually jumped. And my challenge to you today is to actually take the leap in your relationship. Don't make excuses. Do not make excuses. Do not play the victim card. Simply take responsibility and take the leap. Follow what Paul is calling us to. Intentionally, the intentionality of direction. Access the Riverwood app and website. Take a look at those questions. Make the leap to intentionally evaluate the relationship that you're in. Activate number 2, intentionality of time. Make the leap to pursue that person in your life. Pursue them with your most precious gift, quantity time, and then you will create quality time and a quality relationship. And activate number 3, the intentionality of words. Again, access the Riverwood app or website under actionables, and you're going to find these sentence starters. And make the leap to intentionally target your words, those 7,000 to 20,000 words that you say every day. Take some of them and intentionally target them to make an impact on that person's life. But remember, intentions are useless without action. Those of you here in this room, would you stand with me right now and let's respond in worship together.